The Chinese leadership is tightly embracing an environmental agenda at home. But abroad, Chinese activities are wreaking havoc on the natural world with dangerous consequences. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell, and I hope you enjoyed this free episode. It's made possible by the support of viewers like you who subscribe to our premium website, ChinaUncensored.tv. YouTube is literally trying to run us out of business, so the only way we can afford to keep uncensoring China is with your support on ChinaUncensored.tv, where you'll get exclusive episodes you won't see on YouTube. Now, on with the show. China is not generally known for being ecologically friendly. China's first communist leader, Mao Zedong, famously said that man must conquer nature. And so, under his guidance, the CCP set out to do just that, with government programs like the National Four Evils or Four Pests campaign, launched in 1958 as part of the Great Leap Forward. One of the goals of the campaign was to exterminate China's sparrows, because Mao feared they would eat too many of the country's grain seeds. The campaign was wildly successful, with the bird vanishing from large swaths of the country within a few short years. And there was much rejoicing. There's just one problem. Soon after the sparrows disappeared, one of the insect species that the birds had been feeding on exploded in number, creating large locust swarms that decimated China's farmlands and contributed to the Great Famine, which eventually claimed the lives of millions of Chinese people. Great leap forward. Since then, environmental calamities in China have continued to unfold on a biblical scale. China's rivers have been so polluted that they've turned blood red. A long list of chemical explosions have sent all kinds of toxic-looking fumes into the air. And major cities, especially northern ones like Beijing, are frequently shrouded in heavy plumes of smog. A study from 2017 found that air pollution was so bad in northern China that it had cut 3 years off the lifespan of the people in the region. But as the consequences of environmental devastation have become increasingly clear, Chinese people across the country have begun taking it to the streets in protest. By the mid-2010s, these environmental demonstrations were uniting Chinese people across the country and becoming so widespread that they were not only a headache for local authorities, but also threatening the power of the Chinese leadership. So the CCP did what it always does. It seized control. It commandeered the environmental narrative and cracked down hard on any group or individual publicly championing a different environmental outlook than the one being dictated by the CCP. These days, Chinese leader Xi Jinping is super stoked about saving the environment, which he views as essential to building a beautiful China, a green vision that's about much more than threatened species and crackdowns on pollution. You see, Beijing is trying to establish China as a green superpower. Today, China produces 80% of the world's solar panels. At the current growth rate, the industry will be able to meet global solar demand twice over by 2027. The Chinese electric vehicle sector is on a similar path, with Chinese car companies spitting out so many EVs that its domestic market is unable to absorb them all, leaving manufacturers increasingly desperate to export their excess capacity overseas. The government is also boasting about all the millions of hectares of forest it's planted, all while cutting down trees in other places to make room for farmland to increase food independence. A lot of these trees have been planted around China's expanding northwestern deserts, like the Gobi Desert and the Taklamakan Desert, in an effort to reverse desertification. This is known as China's Great Green Wall. Got a problem in China? Build a wall. Just like China's actual Great Wall, however, the Green Wall has risen with mixed results. Initially, the Chinese authorities tried simply dropping tree seeds from military airplanes without considering the local ecosystems or the weather conditions, which unsurprisingly yielded few results. Obviously, it's all the sparrows' faults. They must have eaten the seeds. I'm sure it had nothing to do with choosing trees that need constant human attention or fast-growing vegetation over more slow-growing plants that might be better for local ecosystems. Yet, despite the challenges, improvements have been made through trial and error as the authorities continue to send thousands of workers to the fringes of the desert to plant and maintain the Green Wall. And it has paid off, because last month, Chinese state media hailed the completion of the last stretch of a 2,000-mile belt around China's largest desert, the Taklamakan. leaving it completely encircled by vegetation. Although some of that vegetation looks more like the last sigh of a dying ecosystem than the beginning of a lush green wall. Still, the green wall is getting a lot of attention and praise in Chinese state media, along with other environmental achievements. At the same time, Chinese state media, with some help from the UN, are pushing the narrative that not only is China a green success story, but that nations from across the globe should look to it for inspiration. Of course, the claim that China is a green success story has just one or two teensy, tiny little flaws, as I've shown. But there's another problem if you look at China's behavior overseas. The thing is, all of this greening of China's image at home means a lot of domestic logging operations have been shut down and many logging practices have been outlawed. That means that China's vast timber needs have to be met abroad, turning it into the world's largest importer of timber, including illegal timber, a lot of which comes from Mozambique in Africa. Around 500,000 tons of timber have been illegally exported from Mozambique to China, constituting more than 90% of all illegal logs shipped out of the country. Many of these logs are threatened rosewoods, which are highly prized for luxury furniture in China. Mozambique's rosewood is protected under an international treaty, and the Chinese authorities issued a ban on the import of illegally acquired timber in 2020. But why should that matter? The rosewood must flow, and Chinese officials are accused of looking the other way. But that's not the worst of it. Not only does this trade contribute to an alarming rate of deforestation in Mozambique, the logging is also being carried out by Chinese firms in the region of the country plagued by terrorist fighters whose insurgency has already claimed the lives of thousands of Mozambicans and displaced more than 500,000. The Chinese firms pay protection fees to log insurgency-controlled forests, so the trade is providing jihadist groups with a new source of funding. It's not just Mozambique. All of Western Africa is suffering from corruption and terrorist funding by Chinese logging companies and even Chinese diplomats. And it's not just on land that international Chinese activities have wreaked havoc on natural environments and the local people around them. To compensate for China's overfished waters, vast fleets of Chinese fishing vessels have taken to the high seas in recent decades to fish in international waters, as well as within the maritime zones of other nations. This contributes to the already dire straits of global fish stocks and harms local communities across the world's coastlines that depend on fish resources to survive. In Peru, for example, squid catches were down 70% this year, a disaster that the Peruvian fishing industry blamed on hundreds of gigantic Chinese fishing ships patrolling the edge of Peru's national waters. The head of a squid fishermen association told the Wall Street Journal earlier this year that the Chinese fish day and night and that the plundering is awful. The decline in Peru's squid stocks has forced locals to abandon fishing entirely, causing hardships and poverty. Along the coast of West Africa, a similar story is unfolding as local fishers have lost their livelihoods and their communities have suffered after Chinese fishing fleets showed up in local waters. It's estimated that illegal fishing has contributed to the loss of more than 300,000 jobs across West Africa, worsening prospects, especially for young West Africans, many of whom decide to abandon their hometowns and set out on dangerous migration routes to Europe instead. And the Chinese damage doesn't end there. For as Chinese industries like the EV and battery sector have become highly dependent on an abundant and cheap supply of minerals and metals to keep up their production, Chinese efforts have contributed to a vast expansion of mining operations in places like, you guessed it, Africa. But not only are Chinese mining activities in Africa causing widespread pollution and environmental degradation, they also come with a horrendous human rights record. So really, the Chinese government's much-lauded green agenda often doesn't solve environmental problems as much as it just exports them to other places, with devastating consequences for local communities and even global security. Such a pattern won't solve the globe's many environmental issues and could actually end up making them much worse. But should the CCP one day wake up and realize that China's environmental policies are hugely flawed, I'm confident they'll find the dirty sparrow who's to blame for it all, and they'll bring it to justice. Again, this free episode would not have been possible without support from fans like you who want to help keep China uncensored. Head over to ChinaUncensored.tv to join our exclusive community. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.